Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hello and welcome to the Popternative podcast, the podcast and talk show where we have digital discussions of the worlds of TV, film, pop culture, social media, everything really. Depending on the guest, we talk about it all. As always, I'm your host, Peter Remoliotis, and social media, you know me as PD Beats. You'll recognize my guests from a lot of really cool TV shows, including Better Things, Shameless, and Coop and Cami Ask the World. Rebecca Metz is with us. Rebecca, welcome to Popternative.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here.
And you know what? Like, people will know you recently from Better Things. You have a really cool role on that show. But I was telling you before, I mean, you'll always, like, the first thing I thought of was Shameless. Because of the fact that you were kind of part of that storyline with Fiona at the diner. And there were some important things going on in her world while she was working at the diner.
Very important things. And it's funny because, like, I will meet now kids, like I'll meet a family and the kid knows me from Coop and Cami, and I'll see in the parents' eyes that they're like, I know her from Shameless. And they're not going to say anything, but like they know me from very different shows.
Absolutely. I like your hat, by the way.
Thank you. I slept, you have those days where you're like, I have to do a video thing. I slept on my hair. What am I going to do? I have hats. I'm excited about my hair today. Thank you.
So I mentioned off the top really cool shows you're in, but very quickly, I mean, whether people act, whether they write, whether they direct, whether they perform music, they're all storytellers. So when did Rebecca Metz decide that she wanted to be a storyteller?
I don't think I ever decided that I wanted to be. I think I sort of discovered that I was. Like from as early as I could possibly remember, I would sit around with my friend from across the street as little kids, and we would have a cassette recorder and make up stories in the cassette recorder. Like, I was making reel-to-reel, old 70s reel-to-reel tapes with my dad of like things that we memorized. I think it was just sort of admitting to myself that this is who I am and trying to find an appropriate way to turn that into a life, you know?
No, absolutely. And Better Things on FX that you're in. And sometimes, does it also sometimes play on FXX, or is it mainly just on FX?
I believe it is only on FX and on Hulu, although I wouldn't take my word for it.
Because there also is an FXXX.
FXX.
Yeah.
And they do, it's entirely possible.
Yeah, but you know what? A show like Better Things is basically a show, kind of like what we talked about like before, like with Shameless too, where it's about these real people who deal with real situations. And do you feel like those are the type of stories that people kind of want to watch because they can relate to it a little bit? Like, do you think that's what's hitting stride lately?
I think so. I mean, I think like the first thing that hits those shows to me, and the first thing that I sort of realized that I like to do, is when a show is like not totally a drama and not totally a comedy. Like, sometimes
Dramedy.
it just, but I hate that word because that just makes it sound adorable. And that's not what it is. Like, sometimes it feels like you just got kicked in the gut, and sometimes you're laughing so hard you're crying, you know? And I think that's how life is. Often those two things are happening at the same time. And like, I love shows that are able to go dark and funny. Yep. And I think I've been slowly kind of finding my way to that place for a long time over the course of my career, and Shameless and Better Things are like perfect examples of that. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does, absolutely. And now we're like kind of shifting gears because I did want to also like talk about Coop and Cami for a little bit as well. I mean, Disney Channel. I mean, it's what do you kind of think? So I've always been a big fan and component of like, you know, I grew up. I'm a 91, right? So you know, when I was, you know, like 14, 15, 16, the Nickelodeon.
You were born in 91?
Yes.
Oh, old. I'm so old. Okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm not gonna use that line now where I feel like I'm old because you're just gonna not be happy with that. But
it's totally fine.
Well, no, but I grew up with a lot of those shows on Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, right? And like there's kind of that like, and then younger there were shows like Arthur and like Sesame Street, like the problem-solving shows, right? But like,
interesting, the problem. But I like that you put Sesame Street as a problem-solving show.
I do. Well, do you remember Arthur?
Yes, I didn't watch it, but yes.
That's like the greatest show of all time. And
Okay.
I'm from Canada, and I think the show was Canadian. I mean, Mark Brown was American, so the books were American, but the show was on PBS, but I think it was a Canadian show. And I loved it because it's all about problem solving.
I love that.
Do you think that there needs to be, with a lot of these shows like Coop and Cami, which are for kids, and there's a lot of goofy things that happen.
Yeah.
Do you think like there's a good job being done in terms of those kind of like life lessons and like family values that are kind of thrown in?
I mean, I can only speak for our show. I am not an expert on that genre of like kids television or kids sitcoms. Yeah, it's not my forte. But I do think on our show, like, so I play Jenna Rather, who's the mom of Coop and Cami and 2 other kids, and there's a neighbor who's always around. So it's basically me and 5 children.
Yeah.
They do a kind of like would you rather style. They have like an online show where they ask would you rather style questions. And sometimes those questions are wacky and ridiculous about getting hit in the face with potatoes or whatever. But sometimes they're like life lessons and they're grappling with an ethical question or, there's a secret that this person needs to know. Should I tell them or should I keep the secret? And so Jenna Rather, my character, we find out in the pilot that their dad, my husband, passed away 2 years ago, and Jenna's about to start dating again. And we, over the course of the show, each of the kids, we've had times where we're really grappling with their grief over losing their father, and they're feeling conflicted about having a new guy in my life and in the house, and they deal with it in their own ways. And so it is a Disney Channel show. It's fun, it's silly, but for sure they are dealing with real grounded problems that kids might be dealing with in their lives. So it's probably in a different way than Sesame Street. It's not like educational by design.
No, for sure. No. I mean, I was more like, I remember like watching, like, it was funny because there was like a lot of Disney Channel like cartoons at the time. And there was like the Recess, but Recess was more kind of like slapstick and funny antics going on. But then you had the Weekenders, which was one of my favorite shows. And I remember there was always the dinner table scenes of Tino and his mother making dinner, and she'd always make this gross thing he didn't want to eat, but while they're doing it, he's kind of explaining like what's going on, and she's kind of like the voice of reason. And I remember one episode specifically, Rebecca, where there was a new kid in town and he was getting along with everyone in the group but Tino, and he was getting very frustrated. And then like the life lesson was like, and he's like, Mom, I don't get it. Like, I'm trying my best. Like, I want this guy to like me. I want to be part of the group. And then she's basically like, sometimes, people just don't like certain people, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, so true.
I know, but it just like it dropped the hammer, you know what I mean? And it was a Disney
You were
Channel
expecting
show.
like some perfect piece of advice to make their relationship happen, and it was like some people are just not going to be for you.
No, it is crazy. So, another thing too that I kind of want to talk to you about is, I mean, there's so many amazing there's so much content out there. So from your perspective, being kind of a storyteller and an actor, I just kind of wanted to know what you kind of think of the streaming landscape. You know what I mean? I mean, do you see it as just like an incredible kind of opportunity for more opportunities for yourself? Like, what do you kind of think about it? Because it might be a double-edged sword. I mean, there's a lot more competition right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is in some ways. A lot of people are like, we have too much TV. It's not. It is not possible to keep up with everything. You always feel like, especially if you work in this business and you're supposed to be kind of up on everything that's happening, there's always 75 more shows than you have time to watch, even now when we're all sitting at home doing nothing. But at the same time, I just feel so lucky to be working in TV right now because we are in the middle of a renaissance. Like, we have more diverse voices, more people with perspectives and life experiences who have never had access to making their own shows. Better Things, Pamela Adlon, she's a 50-year-old single working mother who's been an actor her whole life. But like, it's the first live action show FX has ever done with a solo female lead, which it's crazy when you think about it. But
it's so crazy. It's yeah.
There are so, and I mean, that's just one example. There are so many people getting to tell stories from their perspectives in a way that is super exciting. And I think it creates healthy competition. It makes networks and platforms and all these different ways of telling your story kind of compete with each other to get the best storytellers and the most talented people. It's attracting movie people who want creative freedom and want to be able to like work with a tiny scrappy budget and just make the story they want to make. So I think it has its downsides, I'm sure, but for me, it's just so much opportunity and so much creativity. It's like I'm just really glad to be working in it now.
People have mentioned it like as the golden age television, but I've never heard that for the Renaissance. I like that a little bit. And was there not even like at one point like a stigma attached to TV? Where people where people just wanted to do movies.
TV was like slumming it. Movie people wouldn't come work in TV. And I feel like not that movies are slumming it, but it's kind of reversed. Like all these big, Julia Roberts has a series, all these big TV stars are doing series because it's just how the market works. Like however it is in one moment, the only thing you can know for sure is that it's going to change. And right now, TV is having its moment.
Well, for me, like you said, like Julia Roberts, for me, like I'm watching Stargirl on DC Universe right now, and like Luke Wilson's in that. Like that's great. Yep. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's what you're talking about.
I worked with, we had Sharon Stone on Better Things 2 seasons ago. And I was like, just hanging out, acting with Sharon Stone. Like, no big deal. What is happening? And she was so excited to be there. It was just, it's amazing.
Better Things is scripted, obviously. There's a script.
Yes.
But there's like the banter between all of you sometimes. Is there a little bit of improv in there sometimes or not at all?
There is, because Pamela Adlon, who is the showrunner and star and director and head writer and head everything. The nice thing is she's the boss. So like we can come in and she's really handpicked every single person in the cast, in the crew, every single person who's in that room she's picked. So we can go to her and be like, I feel like in this moment I would do this. And she can say yes or no. She can just change it on the fly, which on most shows you can't do because there's like 17 layers of people you have to get to say yes to anything. Yeah. And so we do stick to the script because it's so well written. We want to. Absolutely. But there are, we can play as we're doing it. And if we find something that we want to kind of adjust, we can do that. There have been rare moments when I've been like, this isn't working. What's wrong with it? And we'll just fix it on the fly. Like we'll just all work together because she's surrounded herself with people she trusts to be kind of the bosses of their own characters and have input. And so it's a little of both, but mostly we stick to the script because there's no reason to change it.
But it also depends too. Like I know, for example, like I interviewed Dave Merhage, who's on a show called Rami on Hulu, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of comedians in that show, right? Yeah. And comedians are usually, some of them work in sketch comedy and they're used to being quick, right? So I guess it also depends like who you have too, right?
Yeah. Very much. Very much.
Like the league on FX. Do you remember that show? Mm-hmm. The League? I'm pretty sure that was like mostly improv at times.
Yeah. Yeah. They probably give them a framework or like, yeah, I don't know.
Improv is fun. Like, I enjoy improv. Do you like improv?
I do. And I sort of hate it. I like a script. I have taken a lot of improv classes, and I do an improv show when we're allowed to do them here in LA. And I do it because I need to be able to do it. It keeps me flexible, but there's always a part of me. I want a script. I'm an actor. I want a script, but doing it helps because you always have those moments where you're like, we need to mix this up. Something isn't working. We need to just like wing this and see what happens. And so you have to have those skills also. Yep. I'm not gonna, go put myself on Mad TV or anything, but
absolutely. Mad TV, I miss Mad TV. We're definitely talking about like a lot of your stuff is like in comedy, but like whether you like the genre or not, I still want to ask you about this because one genre that I'm very interested in and I'm seeing is really huge right now, and like not only the movies but in TV as well. I'm a big fan of the horror genre, like the scary stuff. And you know what? It's not for everyone. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I just, from your perspective, like, have you kind of noticed what I'm noticing, where there just seems to be an abundance of like quality, like horror and thriller stuff being made these days? Like, it's crazy.
Oh, for sure. Well, I think, my theory on it is it tends to be low budget, and the technology for making movies has gotten so much better that you can. It's just easier. You can, lock a bunch of people in a room and come up with a horror movie about a bunch of people locked in a room.
Yeah.
You can do it for cheap. People love it. There's a lot. Yeah. There's more of it. And a lot of it is really good.
But it's what you just said too about the script. Like, you can have a low budget, but the script has to be good. And they're making these amazing scripts where it's like, how do you even write this? Like, I mean, Parasite isn't necessarily like a horror, but it definitely has its element. How do you even come up with something like that?
And I also think that it has to do with like many studio movies. Most of the studio movies are these like huge blockbuster franchise, like Transformers 17 or whatever. And like, great, there's absolutely a place for that. But I think what's ended up happening is people have kind of swung far in the other direction. Like, let's do something small that's just about like people locked in a house together. It's like the opposite of cities blowing up, and just about that tension. So I also think it's a little bit a response to, big blow 'em up monster movies that don't end up really being about
Have you worked on a horror movie before?
I haven't worked on a horror movie. I did an episode of American Horror Story, which was pretty straight up horror. The most horror-y thing that we didn't make it to air, but I was brutally murdered by Dylan McDermott, skinned alive.
So it's the murder house season?
It was Asylum, and it was a flashback.
Yes.
It was a flashback. I got killed by I can't remember his name, but
Murder House was my favorite one, and it's like, there's been so many, but I liked Murder House. It was really good.
Murder House. What one was that?
It was the first. It wasn't really called Murder House. Well, that house was the murder house. It's right. I don't know if it's just called American Horror Story season 1.
I don't know if it was just American Horror Story, and then they had to start giving it names because they changed it every season. But
I want to see you like a horror movie being like the mom who's like, I want to see you as the mom of like they're about to go to like a party for Halloween or something, and you're like the mom who's just like, shit's gonna go down at this party, be careful. They're like, Mom, get away from me. And then like,
I don't get murdered.
No, but like, maybe, like well, maybe if you go to the party and we're like, what's happening with my kids? And then like,
I did an episode. It doesn't count as horror, but I did an episode of Bones where I finally got to be the murderer. Like, if you do a lot of guest appearances on TV shows, you do a lot of sort of like whodunit procedurals where it's like, who's the killer? And it was never me. I finally got to do one where it was me. I was so excited.
Do you find it's refreshing though, like circumstances, like there might be someone who recognized you from that episode, right? Or there might be some people, like for example, Shameless, right? You had a pretty cool role on that, but like we're here talking about these, and I kind of told you on the top, like I was pumped because of your role in Shameless, right? That must make you excited too, right? Where you're like, oh, that's so cool that there's like different avenues where people can go with like a conversation with my work, right? Like it's cool.
It's super interesting to me what people recognize me from. I did one episode, a not big part at all, of Prison Break. People remember me from it all the time, and I'm just like, that was a huge show, obviously, but I like walked into the room and screamed. And so it just blows my mind that people remember
Similar
me.
to my friend Stephanie Nakamura, who was on one episode of Jack Ryan, where all she says is like, the doctor will see you now, or something like that. Like one line, and people recognize her.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. And like, for example, I interviewed, we're talking, you mentioned like the like low budget horror films. And I interviewed Giles Matty, who's a British actor he's been like on True Blood. He's been on Once Upon a Time, the 24 that was with Kiefer Sutherland in London. He was in that. And he's in this movie called 1BR, which is this really low budget indie horror film. And like, I wanted to interview him about that. And he's like, it's so cool. Like, cause I'm usually like, like people want to talk to me about 24 and True Blood. And he's like, it's a really cool change to talk about that. You know what I mean?
You never know what people are going to know you from. And it's really fun to be surprised sometimes.
Well, it's funny too, because when I interviewed Alana Ubach, she's been in so many things, right? And she knew exactly which one. She's like, you're young, you're funny, you're smart, you like Waiting with Ryan. She knew. She's like, it's got to be Waiting with Ryan Reynolds. I'm like, that's the one.
I usually don't try to guess, although sometimes it's obvious. Like,
did it make sense a little bit with the Shameless a little bit with me?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Shameless is a big one. And sometimes it'll surprise you because it'll be like the very locked up, well-behaved looking people who for Shameless is like a guilty pleasure. So you can never really tell, but that's a big one.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on Popternative. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
My pleasure. I enjoyed chatting with you too.
So they can watch Better Things now on FX. and
on
Hulu.
Hulu. Yes.
Absolutely. And they could watch it because the writing is great. Like, that's the one thing I know. Like, it's great writing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is, I'll just say, every year we are on many, many critics' lists of the top 10 shows of the year. Like, it's just, it'll become your favorite show. And it's a quick and easy binge. Like,
It is.
sit down on the couch and you'll go through it all before you know it.
For sure. Where can people follow you on social media to keep update with everything?
You can follow me at the Rebecca Metz on Twitter and Instagram.
Amazing. Well, this has been Popternative. YouTube.com/Popternative for previous episodes. Be sure to check out Rebecca Metz in Better Things on FX and Hulu. And until next time, this is Rebecca Metz and PD Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.